Chapter 10, Blue Sky and Goodbye. Lena slept restlessly that night. She had frightening dreams in which something dangerous was lurking in the darkness. And when the lights went on in the morning, she opened her eyes, and the first thought was the door in Pipeworks. And then right away, she felt a thud of disappointment because the door was locked, and someone else, not her, knew it was behind it. She went in to wake Granny. "Time to get up," she said. But Granny didn't answer. She was lying with her mouth half open and breathing in a strange, hoarse way. "I don't feel too good," she said in a weak voice. Lena felt Granny's forehead. She was hot. Her hands were very cold. She ran for Mrs. Murdo and after that to Clothing Square to tell Captain Fleary she was not be coming in to work today. She ran to Oliver Street to the office of Dr. Tower, where she banged on the door until she opened it. Dr. Tower was a thin woman with uncombed hair and shadows under her eyes. When she saw Lena, she grew even more tired. "Dr. Tower, my grandmother's sick. Will you come?" "I will, but I can't promise to help her. I'm low on medicine." "But come look. Maybe she doesn't need medicine." Lena led the doctor a few blocks to her house. When she saw Granny, the doctor sighed. "How are you, Granny Mayfleet?" "I think ill." Dr. Tower laid a hand across her forehead. She asked her to stick her tongue out and listen to her heart and breathing. "She has a fever. You'll need to stay home with her today. Make her soup, give her water to drink, put rags and cool water and lay them across her forehead." She picked up Granny's bony hand in her rough, reddish one. "What's best for you is to sleep today. Your good granddaughter will take care of you." All day, that's what Lena did. She made thin soup of spinach and onions and fed it to Granny a spoonful at a time. She stroked Granny's forehead, held her hand, and talked to her about cheerful things. She kept Poppy as quiet as she could, but as she did this, in the back of her mind was the memory of the days of her father's illness, when he seemed to grow dim like a lamp losing power, and the sound of his breathing was like the water gurgling through a clogged pipe. Though she didn't want to, she remembered the evening when her father let out one last short breath and didn't take another. And the morning, a few months later, when Dr. Tower emerged from her mother's bedroom with a crying baby and a face that was heavy with bad news. In the late afternoon, Granny got restless. She lifted herself up on one elbow. "Did we find it? Did we ever find it?" "Find what, Granny?" "The thing that was lost. The old thing that my grandfather lost." "Oh, yes. Don't worry, Granny. We found it. It's safe now." Oh, good." She sank back on her pillows and smiled at the scene. "What a relief." She coughed a couple times, closed her eyes, and fell asleep. Lena stayed home from work the next day as well. It was a long day. Granny dozed most of the time. Poppy, delighted to have Lena at home to play with, kept toddling over with things she's found. Dust rags, kitchen spoons, stray shoes, whacking them against Lena's knees. Say, "Play with this! Play with this!" And Lena was glad to play with her, but after a while she had enough spoon banging and rug tugging and shoe rolling. "Let's do something else. Shall we draw?" Granny had drunk a full cup of soup for dinner, and she was falling asleep again. So Lena got out her colored pencils and two of the can labels she'd been saving. They were white on the back. They were white on the back and made good enough drawing paper if you flatten them out. With their sharpest kitchen knife, she whittled the pencils into points. She gave a green pencil and a one can label to Poppy, and herself took the blue and smoothed out the other can label on the table. What would she draw? Taking hold of the pencil was like tapping a tap inside her mind through which her imagination flowed. She could feel the pictures ready to come out. It was a sort of pressure, like a water in a pipe. She always thought she would draw something wonderful, but what she actually drew was never quite matched the feeling. It was like when she tried to tell a dream. The words never really captured how she felt. Poppy was grasping the pencil with her fist and making a wild scribble. "Look it!" "Oh, lovely," Lena said. And without even a clear idea of what it was going to be, she began her own picture. She started on the left side of the can label. First, she drew a tall, narrow box. A building. Then more boxes next to it, a cluster of buildings. Next, she drew a few tiny people walking on the street below the buildings. It was then what she nearly always drew, the other city, and every time she drew it, she had the same frustrating feeling. There was more to be drawn. There were other things in the city, marvels there, but she couldn't imagine what they were. All she knew was this city was bright in a different way from Ember. Where the brightness came from, she didn't know. She drew more buildings, filled in the windows and doors, and put in street lamps and added a greenhouse. All the way across the paper, she drew buildings of all sorts of sizes. The buildings were white because, well, that's the color of the paper. She set down her pencil for a moment and studied what she'd done. It was time to fill in the sky. In the pictures she's done with regular pencils, the sky was its true color, well, black. This time, she made it blue, since she was using her blue pencil. Methodically, as Poppy scratched and scribbled beside her, Lena colored the space above the buildings, her pencil moving back and forth in short lines until the entire sky was blue. She sat back and looked at her picture. Wouldn't it be strange, she thought, to have a blue sky? But she liked the way it looked. It would be beautiful, a blue sky. Poppy started using a pencil to poke holes in a paper. Lena folded up her own picture, which took Poppy's away from her. Time for dinner. Sometime deep in the night, Lena woke up suddenly, thinking she heard something. Had she been dreaming? She lay still, her eyes open in the darkness. The sound came again, a weak, trembling call. Lena? She got up and started for Granny's room. Though she had lived in the same house all her life, she still had trouble finding her way at night when the darkness was complete. It was as if the walls had shifted slightly. The furniture moved in new places. Lena stayed close to the walls, feeling her way along. Here was her bedroom door. Okay, here was the kitchen and table. She winced when she stubbed her toe on one of its legs. A little farther, and she'd come to the far wall to Granny's room. Granny's voice was like a thin line drawn in the air. Lena, come and help. I'm coming, Granny. She stumbled over something, a shoe maybe, and fell against the bed. Here I am, Granny. She felt for Granny's hand. It was very cold. I feel so strange. I dreamed about my baby or somebody's baby. Lena sat on the bed. Carefully, she moved her hand over the narrow ridge of her grandmother's body until she came to her shoulders. There, her fingers tangled with the wisps of Granny's hair. She pressed a finger against the side of Granny's throat to feel for her pulse, as the doctor had shown. It was fluttery like a moth that had hurt itself and was flapping in crooked circles. Can I get you some water, Granny? Lena asked. She couldn't think of what else to do. No water. Just stay for a while. Lena tucked one foot underneath her and pulled apart the blanket over her lap. She took a hold of Granny's hand again and stroked it gently with one finger. For a long time, neither of them said anything. Lena sat listening to her grandmother's breathing. She would take a deep, shuddering breath and let out a sigh. Then there would be a long silence before the next breath began. Lena closed her eyes. No use keeping them open. There was nothing to see but dark. She was aware that only of her grandmother's cold, thin hand and the sound of her breathing. Every now and again, Granny would mumble a few words Lena couldn't make out, and then Lena would stroke Granny's forehead and say, Don't worry, it's all right. It's almost morning, though she didn't know if it was or not. After a long time, Granny stirred slightly and seemed to come awake. You go to bed, dear. I'm all right now. Her voice was clear but very faint. You go back to sleep. Lena bent forward until her head rested against Granny's shoulder. Granny's soft hair tickled her face. All right, then. Good night, Granny. She squeezed her grandmother's shoulders gently, and as she stood up, a wave of terrible loneliness swept over her. She wanted to see Granny's face, but the darkness hid everything. It might still be a long time until morning. She didn't know. She groped her way back to her own bed and fell in deep sleep when, hours later, the clock tower struck 6 and the lights came on. Lena went fearfully into her grandmother's room. She found her very pale, very still, and all the life gone out of her.